All right, guys, welcome back to the channel, Warpaint JKU. We're here with Centex Jeeper on Instagram. This is going to be a little bit of a different unedited off-camber because we're here in Moab, right? Easter Jeep Safari 2023, and we're just going to kind of share our thoughts with you guys about what we've learned on this trip with that Leaf Spring JKU and how my JKU performed, maybe some other things that we saw or experienced, right? So, Rolly, Centex Jeeper. What was your take on the Leaf Spring JKU?
So out on the trails, we got to run Top of the World, we got to run Steel Bender,
Right.
and we got to run Hell's Revenge.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of ledge climbs, a lot of steep inclines, a lot of steep declines, and a lot of kind of rock garden little areas. The Leaf Springs performed really well. I've got that long arm TJ with a big stretch on it, with big long control arms up
and stretch. Yeah, you guys have seen that video, right? If you haven't, I'll link to it. But pretty cool build.
Yeah, and compared to that long arm TJ, the Leaf Springs performed really well. Really comfortable off road. They had a lot of nice flex to them when you're going over stuff. I only aired down to about 10 psi, which is a little bit higher than I usually do. And they still performed really well as far as going over obstacles. And what I think was best and what I was most surprised about was how stable it was off camber. I didn't have a single time where I felt any sort of unloading of the spring or anything, because I've never had a leaf sprung rig and didn't know how it was going to perform. And it was planted.
So, and that's one of the things, right? Any suspension system you put in any vehicle is going to have pros and it's going to have cons, right? Anything. And one of the pros of a leaf spring is, just because it is a flat bar essentially that bends up and down, is it wants to go up and down, but it doesn't like to twist. And I've talked about it in other videos where, like, a coil spring is essentially a stiff slinky, right? And it'll kind of bend and flop in any direction at all. So the leaf spring will twist, but it fights the urge to do it. So even without a sway bar, it's very stable when you're off camber because it doesn't want to just flop over, right? So it's pretty cool. That's definitely one of the pros. Yeah. Now, you heard Centex Jeeper over here, Rolly, you heard him say that we only ran the 3 trails with that JKU when we were here for a week. That's because we ran into a couple of issues with that Leaf Spring setup. And unfortunately, it had nothing to do with the build, but the springs in the front worked great. We used 1985 Waggy springs, right? Grand Wagoneer springs, from the rear of that vehicle on all 4 corners. In the front, they worked great, and they should have worked great in the rear, but wasn't so good in the rear.
Yeah.
Why don't you let them know what happened to your rig?
Couple of issues. So like Warpaint said, we were here for 5 days. I got to run 3 days worth of trails. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about Warpaint here in a little bit, I think, and let you know how Warpaint did. But I ran 3 trails, and the reason I only ran 3 trails was because those leaf springs that we got off the Grand Wagoneer were rated for 1,100 pounds per corner. Okay, so I took my Jeep to the scales to get the actual weight of the Jeep, frame, body, motor, transfer case, all that stuff, right? And then we did the math and we decided, sure, 1,100 pounds per corner is plenty. The Jeep doesn't weigh that much, right? So we went ahead and felt really comfortable about doing leafs on all 4 corners with those load ratings. We knew that axle wrap was going to happen because on any leaf sprung rig, and
especially when you go spring over, which is what we did.
We went spring over. On any leaf spring rig, there's going to be some axle wrap, which means that the angle changes whenever you gas, whenever you brake,
right?
On different angles as far as droop and compression and all that stuff, right? So in order to offset that, we put an anti-wrap bar in there, and it worked really well. We drooped the suspension, we compressed the suspension, and it looked really good when you're garage testing. Well, then we got on the trail.
Well, and before we got on the trail here, we did take it out to a local off-road park near us in Texas. Yeah. And that was the only time we had done a shakedown run. And if you're interested in this Jeep build and you're just coming across this, there's a playlist, build list series about it, so you can check that out. We checked it out and everything was working good, right? We had to add in some bump stops and things like that, but everything worked good that first time we took it out. Yeah. And then we got here, and we took it out, and the rear on the passenger side of the JK, everyone talks about how the JK leans over on the passenger side a little bit because of the weight of the gas tank. Well, right where that gas tank started, and again, you'll see it in other videos from EJS, right where that gas tank started, the entire spring pack bent, right? So it was a combination of that weight and a tiny bit of axle wrap. Which again, we had anti-wrap perches, we had an anti-wrap bar in there. So we did what we could to prevent the axle wrap. And it's not bad. It doesn't have a lot of axle wrap, but it was still too much for those springs, which were allegedly rated at 1,100 pounds per corner. So I don't know. My feeling is that those springs are not what they said they were.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah, because at that point we're talking about, sprung weight versus unsprung weight, and we did all that math. The Jeep does not weigh 1,100 pounds per corner.
It doesn't.
Absolutely not.
The rear end doesn't weigh 2,200 pounds.
No, so it should have worked.
And when we say JKU, guys, this isn't a normal JKU. His JKU is pretty gutted, right? Like, it doesn't have a rear seat. Like, it's a pretty gutted JKU on the inside. It's got a soft top, half doors. Like, it doesn't weigh a ton. So we were, don't think that like every JKU weighs this much. It doesn't. This is a pretty light one, and that's why we weighed it. But yeah, that was kind of the experience. Mm-hmm. And then we managed to fix that, right? Again, you'll see that in other videos, but real quick, we basically pillaged a garbage pile, found a leaf spring pack, took a couple leaves out of it, installed another one on either side, and the situation never got worse. It actually added a little bit of weight to the, strength to that spring pack, which was great, but then we had another issue, right? And yeah, go ahead, tell them your experience with that.
All right, so we're running top of the world. So if you guys don't know, it's essentially a big, long climb all the way to this beautiful mesa, I guess it is.
Oh wait, and sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but you got to, if you're watching this video, you have to stay tuned because we have a really awesome, like awesome plan, okay, for what we're gonna do after EJS. Oh, yeah. Like, this is awesome. So you got, all right, so go ahead. He's going to tell you, but go ahead.
All right, so we're running top of the world, and it's the first trail day for the JK. Right in the middle of that trail, top of the world, I'm on cloud 9.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup. You want to go do karate in the garage? Yup.
Right, I've got a JKU on 1 tons. It's fresh, it's brand new. There's not a single scratch on the thing, so I'm taking all the hard
top
lines.
Of the world, there's snow on the ground. Like, yeah, we're hunting out the big rocks and the hard lines.
I'm taking the hardest lines that top of the world had to offer. And I would say a third way through the trail, it's performing great.
Yeah.
It's performing fantastic.
Yeah,
I have a single issue with it. That rig it still is, but it's a point and shoot. You point it at an obstacle, you put your tires on it, and it goes right up.
It's amazing. We had rigs with us with long arms
yeah.
and four link long arms and coilovers
yep.
that couldn't get up stuff that the leaf springs were just swallowing.
Yeah.
It really performed flawlessly.
Yeah.
Except.
So we were going up the trail and there was a huge V notch. So it was a ledge, but it looked like someone carved a pie cut out of it, right? So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, my driver tire is going to go in that V notch. It's going to climb. It's going to put me on a real nasty off camber uphill. Down low, I was it was a big mud hole because there was snow on the ground. It was undercut. I'm thinking, this is great. This is going to be the test for the tires because we've never run those pro comps before.
Oh, it was the test.
Yeah, so it was the test, right? So I put tires up on it, and it was the only time on that trail that I had to put my front locker in, which says something about the setup.
Crazy.
It goes right up, and I'm sitting on an incline, right? So I'm looking at the sky, and I'm a little off camber to the driver's side. And I'm letting the rig eat, and I'm letting it do its thing, and then all of a sudden I hear a bang! And I thought that I hit my front diff on whatever was in front of me because I was leading. I couldn't see.
And you could feel it from the front.
I could feel it. Right? It was a hard hit.
Yeah.
And so I stop. Everybody behind me is like, hey, what was that?
Yeah, it was terrible.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I couldn't get out of the rig because I was so off camber and it was snowy. So essentially I threw it in reverse. I backed it down. And we get on level-ish ground, enough that I could stand there. And we look down, and the drive shaft is in 2 pieces.
Yeah. Basically,
it's not broken.
The splines just slid out, right? So drive shafts are supposed to telescope, and we know with leaf spring rigs and how the springs work, we're not getting into all that detail. We know that when it droops, the drive shaft needs enough movement in it to where it doesn't come apart, and that's exactly what happened. So we called Adams originally to have that drive shaft made, and we told them how long the shackles were and how much suspension droop it was going to have, but we couldn't actually get a true measurement because we couldn't put it on a lift. So this is no fault to Adams drive shaft, right? We were just relying on their experience, but no one builds a leaf spring JKU.
With reverse shackles.
With reverse shackles, right? Because in the front we moved them to the back, right? No one does that. So we kind of guessed. And on the splines on the drive shaft, they made them 2.5 inches longer than normal, and it still wasn't enough. A couple days later, next trail, we still slipped out the drive shaft. So like that was another issue. But if the drive shaft was built correctly for that rig, and the rear springs were built like they advertised them being built, it would have been unstoppable.
It was
right?
great.
It would have been great. Yeah, it would have been great. Let's also flip flop back. I mean, my rig did fine, right? Warpaint, same axles, right? Dana 60, 14 bolt, 3-link long arms, front and rear, coil sprung, tons of droop, tons of travel. It did great, right? Like I don't have any complaints about it. It was a little floppy because that 3-link is so loose. So again, pros and cons, right? Like it flexes really well, but when you're in some really steep off camber stuff, looking down like a 1,000 foot cliff edge, it's a little pucker factor in there.
You gotta make friends with that fear. So, get in the car.
What the hell? It's a goddamn cougar in the car!
And that's where like maybe an anti-rock or something like that might stiffen it up a little bit, prevent me from having so much off camber stuff. But honestly, guys, it was more of a mind thing. It wasn't a Jeep thing, right? Like the suspension performed. It's got those big tires, got all that unsprung weight. It was very stable. It just didn't always feel like it. But here's the big change, okay? The big change. The leaf spring rig is awesome, but we're at a crossroads here. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the 1-tons that are under Maple Leaf, under the JKU. We're gonna put them under the TJ, okay? We're gonna leave that TJ set up with that suspension the way it is. I'm not gonna get into that here because if you wanna know about it, it's crazy, 10-inch stretch, it works really good. You can go check out that video. But if we swap the 1-tons under the TJ, right? That means now it's a 1-ton TJ on 40s with all that crazy suspension, 10-inch stretch. That's pretty badass rig. But then we're gonna take the axles under the TJ, which are JK axles, right? Dana 44 front and rear, trussed, gusseted, molly shafts, geared, lockers, the whole deal. We're gonna take those and put them back under the JKU. But we got a little fun thing that we're gonna do there. So why don't you tell them about where those axles in your JK and your TJ came from?
So my TJ, those axles came from Warpaint, right? So he already mentioned they're completely done up. They're as strong as you can make Dana 44 axles. Another interesting fact is that the wheels and tires also came from Warpaint.
Right. So
Speed locks on 38s. So the entire setup that's underneath my TJ, other than the suspension,
right?
The actual axles, the tires, brakes, everything, all that came from Warpaint.
Right. So before I ton swapped Warpaint, before the YouTube channel, before any of that stuff, my Jeep was originally a Dana 44 with a Dana 30 because it's a sport. Well, I swapped to a Rubicon Dana 44 in the front and built the factory rear chromoly shafts, did all the work to it that you can do to make a set of Dana 44s as strong as you could make them. And then when it was time to 1-ton swap it, Syntex Jeeper wanted the JK swap his TJ, so he took the axles. Well, now we're going to take those axles and we're essentially going to build a clone of Warpaint, right? Like a first gen Warpaint build. So, because it's even a silver JKU, which is kind of cool. So we're going to put the Dana 44s back under another silver JKU. We're going to take the wheels and tires that were red and put them back on it, right? They're Raceline Monsters with 38s on it. We're gonna put them back on it, and we're gonna do something fun with the suspension though. So it's gonna be like a little combination of the way Warpaint used to be and the way Warpaint is now. And the plan.
Yeah. So what we're doing, the JKU is gonna take the JK axles and we're gonna make it a Rubicon again. Electronic lockers front and rear. We're going to make it a Rubicon again. It is a Rubicon.
Again, the way Warpaint used to be.
The way Warpaint used to be.
Right.
So we're going to do coilovers in the front, 14-inch travel, because it's already set up that way.
Right.
Based on how I had to do the shocks for the front of that leaf
They
spring.
might be 12s. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll have to play with the way it works with
Yeah.
the narrower JK axle, but they might be 12s. But coilovers in the front,
Coilovers in the front, and then we're going to coil spring the rear.
coil spring the rear, and we're gonna make it 3-link long arms. front and
3-link
rear.
long arm.
And then we're gonna sell it, right? Then we're gonna sell it
Because because we have plans
Yeah.
for another off-road build
yeah,
on Warpaint's channel.
yeah. So,
But
guys,
we're not going to tell you about it.
So this is big, right? Because if you're in the market and you're looking for a rig, and you've seen how Warpaint performs now on 3-link long arms, it's going to be the same thing. Now it is Dana 44s, but they are built, okay? And they don't have many miles on them because I don't barely ever drive the rig, and he drives it even less than I drive it. So especially having 2 rigs. So guys, 3-link long arm front and rear. Coil over front with 12, maybe 14 inches of travel. Coil spring in the rear, but again, moving the shock around to make it really droop and work well on 38s with built Dana 44s on a silver JKU. Now, we did say earlier that his interior is gutted, but he has the interior still. So, still has the rear seat, still has all that stuff. And we're going to sell it, right? So stick around, check it out, because that transition is going to happen on the channel, and then might have an opportunity to own something that we built and that's pretty freaking cool.
Yep.
And all that stuff that came out of Warpaint, which worked really well. Right?
Yep.
It worked really well.
Yep.
So
Yeah, a few more things coming. And like I alluded to,
Yeah.
in the future,
Yeah.
another mystery off-road build is coming down the road that he's going to work on.
and it is not a Jeep, just FYI. It's not a Jeep at all, but it's going to be awesome and it's going to work really good. Yeah, it's going to be good. So all right, so Centex Sheeper Moab was great. We're starting to plan Moab 2024, right? Easter Jeep Safari 2024 right now. And we got to get going because we got to get out of this Airbnb in like 10 minutes and we're not fully packed up. We still have clothes in the washing machine. And people that own this joint do a great job, but they will bill us if we're not out of here in 10. So we'll be in touch with y'all.